Desolate highway, lonely night, black asphalt stretched, endless. Stars, cold and distant, offered little light. Wind howled through the cab of the truck, a mournful cry. Inside, a man named Jack gripped the wheel. He was tired. Days on the road, hauling cargo, another delivery, another town. The monotony was broken only by the crackle of his CB radio. Tonight, even that was silent. A trucker's weary journey. Jack rubbed his eyes, trying to fight off the fatigue. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 3 a.m., the witching hour, they called it. He chuckled to himself. Superstitions. He didn't believe in that stuff. He reached for his thermos, poured himself some coffee. Lukewarm, bitter, it would have to do. He took a long sip, grimaced, and set it back down. His eyes drifted back to the road. The highway stretched out before him, an endless ribbon of asphalt illuminated by the dim glow of his headlights. The hum of the engine was a constant companion, a monotonous drone that threatened to lull him to sleep. He shook his head, trying to stay alert. The cargo in the back was important, and he had a deadline to meet, no time for rest. He thought about his family, waiting for him back home. His wife, always worried about his long hauls, and his kids, who would be fast asleep at this hour. He missed them, but this was the life he had chosen, the life of a trucker. He turned on the radio, hoping for some music to keep him awake. Static. He flipped through the stations, finally finding one that played an old country song. It reminded him of his younger days when he first started driving. Back then, the road was an adventure, full of promise and excitement. Now, it was just a job, a means to an end. He sighed, feeling the weight of the years. The road signs blurred as he drove on, mile after mile. He knew he had to keep going, had to push through the exhaustion. The destination was still hours away, and there was no turning back. He took another sip of the bitter coffee, hoping it would give him the energy he needed. The night was long, but he was determined to make it through. For his family, for himself. The journey was weary, but it was his journey, and he would see it to the end. Static whispers. A sudden burst of static from the radio startled him. He frowned, reaching to adjust the dial. He hadn't touched it in hours. The static continued, a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the cab. Then a voice, faint, barely audible. A woman's voice, high-pitched and distorted. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone sent a shiver down his spine. He turned the volume down, then off completely. Voices through the static, silence. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He told himself it was just interference, a trick of the radio waves. He tried to ignore it, to focus on the road, but the voice returned, louder this time, closer. He could almost make out words now. A name. His name? He slammed his foot on the brake, the truck screeching to a halt on the deserted highway. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing like a drum in the silence of the room. He stared at the radio, fear gripping him like a vice, his eyes wide and unblinking. The old radio sat on the table, its presence almost menacing. He could turn it off, he knew. The thought crossed his mind repeatedly, a simple action that could end this torment. Just turn it off, and the voice would stop. The room would return to its usual quiet, and the unsettling feeling would dissipate. But something held him back, a morbid curiosity. What if he missed something important? What if the voice had more to say? He reached out a trembling hand and slowly turned the volume back up. The static grew louder, filling the room with its harsh, grating sound. The static returned, louder than ever. It was almost unbearable, like nails on a chalkboard, but he couldn't bring himself to turn it off. And then, clear as day, he heard it. Jack. The name cut through the static like a knife, clear and unmistakable. The voice sent chills down his spine. It knew his name. How could it know his name? He hadn't told anyone about this old radio, hadn't even mentioned it in passing. He looked around the room, half expecting to see someone there, someone who could explain this eerie phenomenon. But he was alone. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady himself. The room seemed to close in around him, the walls pressing in. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He needed to understand what was happening. He needed to know why the radio had called his name. He sat down at the table, his mind racing. He grabbed a notebook and a pen, determined to document everything he heard. He scribbled down the word Jack and waited, the pen poised above the paper, ready to capture the next message. The static continued, a constant background noise that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. He waited, every muscle in his body tense, his mind a whirlwind of questions and fears. What would the radio say next? What did it want from him? His hand hovered over the dial once more, ready to turn it off if things got too intense. But he couldn't bring himself to do it, not yet. He was determined to see this through, to understand the mystery of the voice in the noise. He had to know the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. The radio seemed to glow faintly, as if it held some hidden power, some secret that was just waiting to be uncovered. He steeled himself, ready for whatever came next. The name and the noise was just the beginning. He was ready to face whatever the radio had to reveal. The voice continued. "Don't you recognize me, Jack?" It was a woman's voice, filled with sadness and something else. Anger, accusation. He couldn't be sure. He knew that voice. He hadn't heard it in years, but he knew it. It was her. It couldn't be. She was gone. He had said goodbye years ago. Then how? "You can't escape me, Jack!" The voice was a low growl now, full of menace. "You can't run from what you did." The radio crackled and popped, the static reaching a fever pitch. Then silence. The radio went dead. Jack sat there, frozen in place, his blood turning to ice. He stared at the radio, his mind reeling. It couldn't be her, it couldn't be. He sat there for what felt like an eternity, the silence deafening. The only sound was the beating of his own heart. He finally reached out and turned the ignition key. The engine roared to life, breaking the spell. He pulled back onto the highway, his hands shaking. He didn't know what to believe. Was it real? Was she really trying to reach him, or was he losing his mind? He glanced nervously at the radio, half expecting it to crackle back to life. But it remained silent. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos in his mind. Memories of the past flooded back, each one more painful than the last. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He drove on. The image of her face burned into his mind. Her eyes, once full of life, now haunted him. They seemed to follow him wherever he went, a constant reminder of what he had lost. The road ahead was dark and uncertain, much like his future. He felt a chill run down his spine as he thought about the events that had led him to this point. He couldn't escape the past. It clung to him like a shadow, always there, always watching. Every time he looked in the rearview mirror, he half expected to see her sitting in the back seat, her eyes filled with sorrow and accusation. The weight of his guilt was almost too much to bear. It was riding with him, whispering to him from the shadows. The voice was faint, almost inaudible, but it was there. It spoke of regrets and missed opportunities, of things left unsaid and undone. He tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. The shadows seemed to grow darker with each passing mile. The highway stretched before him, endless and dark. It was as if the road itself was a reflection of his soul, filled with uncertainty and fear. The fog rolled in, thick and suffocating, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. He was alone, but he didn't feel alone. The presence beside him was palpable, a cold and accusing force that seemed to seep into his very being. He could feel her eyes on him, judging him, condemning him. The loneliness was overwhelming, but it was nothing compared to the guilt that gnawed at his soul. He felt her presence beside him, cold and accusing. It was as if she was trying to tell him something, to make him understand the depth of his mistakes. He wanted to speak to her, to apologize, to make things right, but he knew it was too late. The past could not be changed, and the future seemed bleak and unforgiving. He knew then that his journey was far from over. It had just begun. The road ahead was long and treacherous, filled with unknown dangers and challenges. But he was determined to face them, to find some semblance of redemption. He took a deep breath and pressed on, the darkness closing in around him. The journey was unending, but he was ready to face it, 1 mile at a time.